President Donald Trump explores options to tax imports even after the Supreme Court strikes down tariffs his administration imposed last year. WIFR's Bria Walters talks to a political professor about what this means for local businesses and for farmers.
The president loves tariffs.
The Supreme Court strikes down President Donald Trump's far-reaching global tariffs as unconstitutional. But after railing on the justice's decision, the president responded with another legal maneuver, a 10% global tariff on top of the levies already in place.
Wherever there are competing American and foreign goods, that's where he may well want to put the tariffs now.
To Polo soybean farmer Keith Poole, everything feels uncertain.
But if we could just have some more certainty in what's going on with our export environment, that would help.
Last year was hard for Poole's farm because of tariffs. China bought around $12 billion in U.S. soybeans in 2024, but at a point last year, they bought zero, according to the United States Department of Agriculture.
Since then, China has started importing beans through some talks with the Trump administration, and recently they announced they were going to actually import more than what they had talked about.
But not every local business is affected by the decisions. In a statement to WIFR, Rockford Brake Manufacturing CEO Paul Wright says the primary driver for market changes on commercial vehicle brake drums are based on different tariffs enacted following an extensive investigation into the industry by the USITC. Bob Evans, a political science professor for Rockford University, wonders what will happen to the money already paid out because of tariffs.
The court didn't specify that they be refunded.
He also mentions that relationships with other countries may never be repaired.
I don't think that this by itself will go very far at all towards improving relations.
In the state line, Bria Walters, WIFR News.
Trump also said he would use a range of other laws and regulations to impose new tariffs, though most of those statutes would require a legal process before duties could be imposed. Poole says he's listening for more news of the tariffs as he prepares for the upcoming growing season. Lawmakers react to